In the fair realm of Rivendell, where the waters of Bruinen sang eternal songs of memory and starlight danced upon the leaves of malorn trees, there dwelt one whose very existence was shrouded in mystery deeper than the paths of the dead. Mithrandir was his given name, though he bore it not in honor of the Grey Pilgrim who had walked before him, but as a shadow of what he might never become. The son of Gandalf the White stood upon the balcony of Elrond's house, his grey eyes, so like his father's, yet touched with a mortal's uncertainty, gazing eastward toward the misty mountain. 27 winters had passed since his mysterious birth. When Gandalf had arrived at the gates of Rivendell bearing not a staff or sword, but a babe wrapped in cloth that shimmered like starlight. "The blood of the mire runs thin in mortal veins," Elrond had said then, his ageless face grave with portent. "Yet what flows within this child is both blessing and curse, for he shall walk between two worlds, belonging fully to neither." Now, as the first chill of autumn crept through the valley, Mithrandir felt the weight of his heritage like a stone upon his heart. His father had departed beyond the grey havens with the ring-bearer, leaving behind only whispered words. "When the shadow rises anew, seek ye the crown of stars in the depths, where sunlight has never touched. Only then shall the true test of thy blood be known." A soft footfall upon the marble floor drew his attention. Arwen Undomiel approached, her beauty unmarred by the years, though her eyes held the deep sadness of one who had loved and lost much. "The council convenes at moonrise," she said, her voice like silver bells in winter air. "Lord Elrond would speak with you of the dreams that have come to Rivendell these past 7 nights." Mithrandir turned from the mountain vista, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the small pendant at his throat, a gift from his father, wrought of mithril and set with a stone that seemed to hold captured starlight. "The same dreams that have haunted my sleep, of darkness rising in the north, and voices calling from the deep places of the earth?" "The same," Arwen confirmed, though her expression grew troubled. "Yet in the dreams of the Eldar, you are seen not as savior, but as harbinger. There are those among the White Council who fear what you might become, should the darkness claim you as it claimed. Others, the unspoken name hung between them like a shadow. Saruman the White, who had fallen to corruption despite his wisdom and power. If one so mighty could be turned, what hope was there for a half-blood youth who had never truly mastered the gifts of his lineage? As if summoned by their thoughts, a raven came winging from the north. Its black feathers rhymed with frost, though autumn had barely begun. It alighted upon the balcony's rail and spoke in the common tongue, as was the way of such messengers in the days when magic still flowed strong in Middle-earth. "Lord Mithrandir," it croaked, its voice harsh with urgency. "Dark tidings from Fornost and the North Downs. The rangers have found signs, ancient symbols carved in stone, and barrow mounds split open from within. The dead walk again, but these are not the Barrow Wights of old. Something greater stirs, something that should have remained bound until the world's ending." The young heir of Gandalf felt his blood grow cold, for he knew those symbols of which the raven spoke. In the deepest vaults of Rivendell, among scrolls and tomes that predated even the Elder Days, he had seen their like. They were the seals of the Valor themselves, set in the foundations of the world to bind what should never be released. "Tell me, Dark Herald," Mithrandir said, though his voice scarce rose above a whisper, "were there 7 such symbols, arranged in the pattern of the Great Bear?" The raven's eyes, black as chips of midnight, fixed upon him with something approaching fear. "Aye, young master, 7 sealed, and each one broken. How came you by such knowledge?" But Mithrandir had already turned away, his face pale as morning mist upon the mountain. For in that moment, the first fragment of his father's purpose became clear, and with it came the terrible understanding that his quest would not be one of glory, but of sacrifice beyond measure. The council would convene, and choices would be made that would shape the fate of all free people. Yet in his heart, the son of the White Wizard knew that the true burden was his alone to bear, and that the road ahead would lead him to the very roots of the world, where ancient evils slumbered still. As night fell over Rivendell, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Mithrandir whispered his father's name to the wind and prepared to take the first steps upon a path that would either save Middle-earth or damn it utterly. The age of peace was ending, and the time of testing had begun. The Chamber of Fire in Rivendell had not seen such a gathering since the dark days before the War of the Ring. Representatives of the free peoples sat in the high seats, their faces grave in the dancing light of the hearth. Elrond Halfelven presided, his star-crowned brow bearing the weight of 3 ages of the world, while beside him sat Galadriel, Lady of Lothlorien, whose eyes held depths that mortal minds could scarce fathom. Mithrandir entered the chamber as the moon reached its zenith and felt the weight of many gazes upon him. Some held hope, others suspicion, and not a few bore the shadow of fear. He was, after all, the untested heir of one who had been both salvation and terror to the forces of darkness. "Be welcome, son of Mithrandir the Grey," Elrond spoke, his voice carrying the authority of ages. "Though your father has passed beyond the circles of the world, his wisdom echoes yet in these halls. We would hear what counsel his blood might offer in this dark hour." Before the young man could respond, another voice rang out, clear and cold as winter starlight. Círdan the shipwright had come from the Grey Haven, his ancient face marked with sorrows beyond counting. "I would speak first of what I have seen," the Elven Lord declared. "7 ships have I sent forth upon the western sea these past months, bearing those who would find rest in the undying land. 7 ships, and none have returned. The straight road is blocked, dear friends, by something that dwells now between the circles of the world." A murmur of dismay rippled through the assembly. If the path to Valinor was barred, then no aid might come from the Valar themselves. Galadriel rose, her light filling the chamber like captured starlight. "In Caras Galadon, the mirror has shown me visions of what was, and what may yet come to pass. I have seen the 7 seals of binding, set in the world's foundation by Manwë himself, to contain that which was cast down before the making of Arda. These seals weaken, and soon they shall break entirely." "What lies beyond these seals?" asked Dain Ironfoot, who had come from the Lonely Mountain with tidings from the Dwarven realms. "For my folk have heard hammering in the deep places, and voices singing songs of malice that freeze the very stone." It was Mithrandir who answered, though his voice trembled with the weight of forbidden knowledge. "Morgoth's crown," he said, and the words fell like stones into a still pool. "The iron crown of the first Dark Lord, which contains the last remnant of his power. When he was thrust through the door of night into the void, his crown was cast into the depths beneath the roots of the mountain, and 7 seals were set upon it by the Valar themselves." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Finally, Elrond spoke, his voice heavy with dread. "How comes a mortal youth to know such things? Even in the lore of Rivendell, such knowledge is hidden in the deepest vaults." Mithrandir's hand moved to the pendant at his throat, and as he touched it, the mithril stone began to glow with inner light. "My father left me more than memories, Lord Elrond. When the darkness rises, the blood of the Maiar remembers what was set aside for the world's protection." Suddenly, the chamber doors burst open, and Radagast the Brown stumbled in, his robes torn and his eyes wild with terror. Birds and small beasts crowded around him, chittering and crying in their various tongues. "Too late!" he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "The 7th seal is broken. Even now, the crown stirs in its prison, and its malice spreads like poison through the roots of the earth. The very trees cry out in pain, and the stones themselves begin to weep tears of darkness." Galadriel's face grew grim. "If Morgoth's crown wakes fully, its power will corrupt all it touches. The free peoples will turn upon each other, and Middle-earth will know such war as has not been since the Elder Days." "Then what hope have we?" cried Gimli the dwarf, who had traveled from Aglarond to answer the summon. "How can mortal folk stand against the malice of the first Dark Lord? All eyes turned to Mithrandir, and in that moment he felt the full weight of his heritage settling upon his shoulders like a mantle of lead. The pendant at his throat grew brighter, and suddenly his father's voice seemed to whisper in his mind, "The crown of stars lies in the sunless deep. Only light can bind what darkness has loosed. There is a way," he said slowly, his young face aging before their eyes, "but it will require a journey into the very heart of the earth, to places where no mortal foot has trod. The crown of stars. It is the only artifact with power enough to reforge the broken seal." "The crown of stars is a myth," protested Círdan. "A tale told to comfort children in dark nights." "Nay," said Galadriel softly, her eyes fixed upon Mithrandir with something approaching wonder. "I see it now in your face. Child of two worlds, you bear not only your father's wisdom, but his burden. The crown of stars is real, and you know where it lies hidden." Mithrandir nodded slowly. "In the sunless sea, beneath the roots of the misty mountains, where the waters of the world flow into darkness eternal. But the path is perilous beyond measure, and I cannot walk it alone." "Then you shall not," declared a voice from the shadows. Legolas stepped forward, his bow gleaming in the firelight. "The son of Thranduil offers his service, as his father served the White Council in days of old." One by one, others stepped forward. Gimli the dwarf, Éomer of Rohan, and even young Faramir, now steward of Gondor, pledged their aid. But it was the last voice that surprised them all. "I too would join this company," said Arwen Evenstar, and her words rang with the authority of Elrond's daughter. "For I have seen in dreams the price that must be paid, and I would not have it fall upon one alone." As the moon set beyond the mountain, the new fellowship was born, 9 companions to match the original 9 who had set out to destroy the ring. But their quest would lead not to Mount Doom, but to depths far more perilous, where the very foundations of the world lay bare to their seeking. The son of the White Wizard looked upon his companions and felt both gratitude and terrible foreboding, for in the pendant's glow he glimpsed shadows of what was to come, and saw that not all who began this journey would see its end. The second day was dawning, and already the darkness grew stronger. 3 days after the breaking of the council, the Fellowship of 9 set forth from Rivendell as the first snows of winter began to dust the peaks of the misty mountains. They rode in the gray light of dawn, their breath misting in the cold air, while above them the very sky seemed to darken with each passing hour. Mithrandir rode at their head upon Shadowfax's son, a gray stallion gifted by the Rohirrim, and nearly as swift as his legendary sire. Behind him came his 8 companions, each bearing such weapons and provisions as might serve them in the perilous road ahead. Yet heaviest of all the burdens they carried was the knowledge of what they sought, and what failure might mean for all the free peoples of Middle-earth. Their path led north through the Etten Moors, where ancient giants had once walked in the world's youth. Now the land lay desolate and strange, with standing stones that hummed with eldritch power and mist that moved against the wind. It was Legolas who first noticed that something was amiss. "The very air grows thick with malice," he said, his keen eyes scanning the gray waste. "And see, the stones themselves begin to weep." Indeed, a dark substance like tears of shadow seeped from the ancient monoliths, pooling upon the ground and spreading outward in slow, creeping tendrils. Where it touched, the sparse grass withered, and the earth itself grew black. "The crown's influence spreads," Mithrandir said grimly. "Even bound and buried, its malice seeps into the roots of the world. We must make haste, lest all of Eriador fall under its shadow." But their progress was not unopposed. On the second day beyond the Etten Moors, as they descended into the vale where the old road to Fornost ran, they found their way blocked by a sight that chilled the heart. An army of the dead stood arrayed before them, not the pale spirits of the paths of the dead, but corpses raised by dark sorcery, their eyes burning with malevolent fire. At their head rode a figure in black armor that seemed to drink in light itself. When it spoke, its voice was like the grinding of stone upon stone. "Turn back, son of the White Wizard. and perhaps thy death shall be swift. Continue upon this path, and know torments beyond measure. I know thee, Mithrandir replied, though his voice trembled. Thou art the Witch King of Angmar, chief of the 9 who were enslaved by the Dark Lord's will. But thy master is fallen, and thy time is ended. The Witch King's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. Fallen, aye, but not destroyed. Even now he stirs in the void, and his power flows through the crown that was his. Soon all Middle-earth shall bow before the might of Morgoth restored. The battle that followed was fierce beyond telling. The dead felt no pain and knew no fear, pressing forward in endless waves, while the Witch King wielded magics that turned the very air to ice and shadow. Yet the Fellowship stood firm, each fighting with the courage of desperation. Legolas sent arrow after arrow into the writhing mass of corpses, each shaft blazing with elven light that sent the undead shrieking back to their grave. Gimli's axe sang as it clove through bone and rusted mail, while Eomer's sword, Guthvini, flashed like lightning in the gloom. But it was Arwen who turned the tide of battle. Drawing forth a crystal vial filled with the light of Arundel's star, she held it aloft and spoke words in the ancient tongue of Valinor. The light blazed forth like a second sun, and before its radiance, the army of the dead crumbled to dust and shadow. The Witch King himself reeled back with a cry of pain and rage. This is not ended, spawn of Gandalf. The crown calls to its children, and we shall answer. Beware the sunless deeps, for there thy doom awaits. With those words, he dissolved into mist and shadow, leaving only the echo of malevolent laughter upon the wind. As the Fellowship pressed onward, the landscape grew ever more desolate. The mountains loomed higher and more threatening, their peaks shrouded in unnatural darkness. Strange lights flickered in the depths of valleys, and sometimes they heard the sound of great wings beating overhead, though no creature could be seen. On the 5th day of their journey, they came at last to the entrance of the ancient road that led beneath the mountain, a great archway carved in the living rock, covered with runes in scripts that predated even the Elder Days. Above the arch, words were graven in letters of fire. Here begins the road of no return, where light fails and hope grows dim. None who enter may depart unchanged, save by death or victory. Grim, cheerful, muttered Gimli, shouldering his axe. My people carved merrier words upon tombstone. Faramir studied the archway with the eye of a scholar. These runes are older than Numenor, older perhaps than the awakening of the elves. What power wrought such things? The Valar themselves, in the world's youth, Mithrandir answered. This is one of the 7 great passages that lead to the roots of Arda. Here the waters of all the world flow down into darkness. And here, he paused, his hand moving to the pendant at his throat. The mithril stone pulsed with urgent light, and suddenly he staggered as visions flooded his mind. Images of vast halls carved from living stone, of waters that flowed upward toward distant stars, and of something that waited in the deepest dark, patient as death itself. What is it? Arwen asked, her hand upon his arm. The crown stirs, he whispered. It knows we come, and it welcomes us. There is intelligence in it still, malice and cunning beyond mortal understanding. It seeks to corrupt us before ever we reach the sunless sea. Legolas knocked an arrow to his bow, though what foe he might face in the depths ahead, none could say. Then we must go forward with all haste, ere its influence grows stronger still. One by one, the Fellowship passed beneath the ancient arch and began their descent into the roots of the world. Behind them, the last light of day faded from the sky, and ahead lay only darkness deeper than the void between the stars. But in that darkness, something stirred and whispered welcome, and the very stones began to sing with malice aforethought. The road beneath the mountains was not like the familiar passages of Moria, with their broken halls and fallen glory. This was far older, carved not by dwarf craft, but by powers that shaped the world itself. The walls were smooth as glass and black as midnight, yet they gave off a faint phosphorescent glow that allowed the Fellowship to see their way. For 7 days they descended, following stairs that wound ever downward through chambers vast enough to hold the entire city of Minas Tirith. Strange sculptures lined the walls, not wrought by any hand of mortal or immortal craft, but shaped by the very music of creation itself. Here, a waterfall frozen in stone sang silent harmony. There, a grove of crystal trees caught and held the light of stars that had died before the moon was made. "I feel as though we walk through the memories of the world," Arwen whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the vast spaces, as if these halls remembered the music of the Ainur, when all things were but thought in the mind of Eru. Gimli ran his fingers along the glassy walls, his craftsman's eye marveling at their perfection. "No tool made these marks," he muttered. "This stone was sung into shape, as the elves sing their silver halls in Rivendell." But as they descended deeper, the beauty began to fade, replaced by something altogether more sinister. The walls grew rough and broken, scarred as if by great claws or weapons of immense power. Dark stains marred the stone, and in places the very rock seemed to weep tears of shadow. It was on the 8th day that they came upon the first of the Forgotten Kings. The hall opened before them like the maw of some primordial beast, its ceiling lost in darkness above. Upon great thrones of black stone sat 7 figures, each crowned with gold that had tarnished to the color of old blood. Their flesh had long since fallen to dust, but their bones remained, held together by will and malice, and the power of the thing they had once served. "Behold," spoke the first of the 7, its voice like the grinding of millstone, "mortal fool, who think to meddle with powers beyond their understanding. Know ye not that death is the least of torments for those who disturb the crown's rest?" Mithrandir stepped forward, though every instinct screamed at him to flee. The pendant at his throat blazed with white fire, and by its light he could see the truth of what sat before them. "I know thee," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "Thou art the 7 kings of Numenor, who fell to shadow ere Sauron's lies took root. When the isle was broken and cast beneath the waves, ye fled here to the roots of the world, thinking to find sanctuary in darkness. But darkness found thee first." The skeletal king laughed, a sound like breaking bells. "Aye, we sought power to rival the Valar themselves, and we found it in service to the crown that shall never be broken. Join us, son of Gandalf, and know dominion over all Middle-earth. Refuse, and thy bones shall join ours upon these thrones." "There is another choice," Legolas said quietly, his bow half drawn, "the peace of the grave, which ye have spurned too long." Battle erupted in the Hall of Thrones, but this was no clash of sword and spear. The 7 kings wielded sorceries learned in the depths of the earth, calling up shadows that took the shapes of fell beasts and spirits of flame that burned with cold fire. The very air grew thick as pitch, and strange whispers filled the darkness, speaking words that no mortal tongue should utter. Faramir found himself beset by phantoms of his own making, visions of his brother Boromir, corrupted and fallen, reaching out with hands like claws to drag him down into madness. Eomer battled shadow steeds, whose hoofbeats rang like funeral bells, while Gimli's axe seemed to grow heavier with each blow, as if the very metal remembered the malice that had forged it. But it was Arwen who struck the crucial blow. Drawing forth the crystal vial that had served them against the Witch King, she hurled it at the feet of the central throne. The vial shattered with a sound like silver bells, and the light of Arendil blazed forth in the darkness. The 7 kings shrieked as one, their forms beginning to dissolve in the holy radiance. "Fool!" cried their leader. "Ye have wasted thy greatest weapon upon shadows. What light remains to thee when ye face the crown itself?" "The light that never failed," Arwen replied, though her face was pale with exhaustion. "The light that burns in every heart that chooses hope over despair." As the kings crumbled to dust at last, their thrones split and fell, and a great crack appeared in the floor of the hall. From the depths below came the sound of rushing water and a wind that carried the scent of the sea. "The sunless water," breathed Mithrandir. "We are close now, closer than I dared hope." But Radagast, who had been strangely silent throughout the battle, now spoke with a voice not entirely his own. "Close? Aye, but not alone. Even as we speak, others descend by different paths, servants of the crown who seek to reach it before us. The race begins in earnest now." Through the crack in the floor, they could hear the sound of pursuit, many feet upon stone, and voices raised in chants of malice. The enemy had found their trail at last. Gathering their remaining strength, the Fellowship pressed on into the depths, following the sound of the sunless waters toward whatever fate awaited them in the heart of darkness. Behind them, the pursuit drew closer, and ahead lay trials that would test them beyond all measure. The crown of Morgoth was waking, and its dreams were growing stronger. The passage beyond the Hall of Forgotten Kings narrowed and widened by turns, following the ancient course of waters that had flowed since the world's making. Strange, luminous fungi provided ghostly illumination, while the sound of the sunless sea grew ever stronger, a deep, rhythmic pulsing like the heartbeat of the earth itself. After 3 days of descent, through winding tunnels and vast caverns filled with pillars of living stone, the Fellowship emerged at last upon the shores of a sight that stole their breath and chilled their hearts. Before them stretched waters black as the void between the stars, their surface perfectly still, save for the slow, hypnotic rhythm of waves that caught no light and cast no foam upon the obsidian shore. "Behold, the sunless sea," Mithrandir whispered, his voice filled with awe and dread. "Here flow all the tears that have been shed since the world began, and here the dreams of the sleeping earth take shape in forms that mortal eyes were never meant to behold." The shore was wrought of black glass, smooth as a mirror, stretching away into darkness on either side. No stars reflected in these waters, for no light of sun or moon had ever touched them. Yet far out upon the sea, strange phosphorescent gleams moved like ghost ships sailing courses known only to the dead. Gimli knelt and touched the dark water with one finger, then jerked his hand back with a cry of pain. "It burns!" he gasped, "like ice and fire together." "These are not waters as we know them," Arwen said softly. "They are liquid memory, the dreams and nightmares of Arda itself made manifest. To sail upon them is to enter the very mind of creation." But how were they to cross? The sea stretched endlessly before them, and no boat waited upon its shores. It was Legolas who first spotted the answer, his keen elven eyes piercing the darkness better than any of his companions. "There," he pointed to a distant gleam upon the waters, "a ship comes, and I fear it bears no friendly crew." Indeed, a vessel was approaching through the darkness, a craft of black wood bound with iron, its sails billowing though no wind stirred the air above the sea. Upon its deck stood figures in armor that seemed wrought of shadow itself, and at their head, the Witch King. Eomer breathed, his hand moving to his sword. "He comes to bar our passage." But Mithrandir shook his head. "Nay, look closer. This ship sails not for the crown, but away from it. See how its crew looks ever over their shoulders, as if fleeing from something that pursues." As the vessel drew near to shore, they could see that he spoke truly. The crew were not servants of darkness, but its victims, elven mariners of the elder days, their faces bearing the terrible marks of those who had gazed upon things beyond mortal comprehension. Their captain, tall and proud despite his obvious torment, leaped down onto the glassy shore. "Hail, walkers in darkness," he said, and his voice held the music of Valinor, though now it was broken and filled with sorrow. "I am Sirion of the Grey Ships, once of the Blessed Realm, now doomed to sail these accursed waters until the world's ending. What madness brings the living to this place of memory and shadow?" Mithrandir stepped forward, the pendant at his throat pulsing with gentle light. "We seek the crown of stars, that we might bind what should never have been loosed. Will you bear us across these waters, Lord of the Grey?" Kirion's eyes widened, and for a moment hope flickered in their depths, like distant starlight. "The crown of stars? But that is, it cannot be. That artifact was lost when the world was young, hidden where even the valor might not find it. Not lost, Mithrandir replied. Hidden, aye, but not beyond reach of those who bear the proper key. He held up the pendant, and its light seemed to answer something deep within the waters themselves. The elven captain studied the glowing stone with the eye of one who had sailed the straight roads to Valinor in the days of light. By the flame imperishable, he whispered, that is no mere mithril, but crystallized starlight, a fragment of the very light that shone before the lamps of the valor were kindled. Where came you by such a thing? It was my father's gift, Mithrandir answered simply, and now it may be the salvation of us all. But their conference was interrupted by sounds of pursuit from the passages behind them. Torchlight flickered in the tunnels, accompanied by the tramp of many feet and the clash of weapons upon stone. They come, Radagast gasped, his eyes wild with prophetic terror. The servants of the crown, led by powers that should have remained bound. We must flee, or all is lost. Sirion nodded grimly. Board my vessel, mortals, though I warn you, the price of passage upon the sunless sea is high. These waters show all who sail them, their deepest fears made manifest, and many who begin the journey do not complete it with their sanity intact. One by one, the fellowship boarded the gray ship, and as the last of them, Gimli, muttering prayers to his ancestors, stepped upon the deck, Sirion raised his hand and spoke a word of power. The vessel leaped forward like a living thing, racing across the dark waters while behind them, their pursuers emerged upon the shore with cries of rage and frustration. But the sunless sea was not to be crossed without trial. Even as they sailed into the heart of darkness, the waters began to glow with eldritch light, and shapes rose from the depths, not fish or sea beasts, but the memories of all who had ever drowned in sorrow, reaching up with phantom hands to drag the living down into their realm of perpetual grief. Do not look upon them, Sirion warned, his own eyes fixed steadfastly ahead. To gaze upon the drowned memories is to become one with them, lost forever in the sorrows of ages past. Yet, despite his warning, each member of the fellowship found their eyes drawn to the spectral figure that swam alongside their vessel. Faramir saw his father Denethor as he had been in life, proud and noble before despair claimed him. Eomer beheld the shade of his sister Eowyn, not as she was, but as she might have been, had darkness claimed her in the battle of the Pelennor field. But it was Arwen who suffered most, for in the dark waters she saw herself, older, faded, choosing mortality for love of Aragorn, only to watch helplessly as death claimed him and left her alone in a world grown strange and hostile. It is not real, Mithrandir said, moving to her side as she swayed upon the deck. The waters show what might be, not what is. Take heart, Lady of Rivendell, for thy love shall endure, though kingdoms fall. Yet even as he spoke those words of comfort, he felt his own resolve wavering, for in the depths of the sunless sea, something vast and ancient stirred, something that wore his father's face, but spoke with a voice of malice beyond measure. The crown was calling, and its song grew stronger with each league they sailed into the heart of darkness. For 7 days and 7 nights, the gray ship sailed across the sunless sea, carrying its passengers through waters that reflected not light, but memory itself. Strange currents bore them ever deeper into the heart of darkness, while overhead, the cavernous roof of the world stretched beyond sight, supported by pillars of stone that had been ancient when the Valar first shaped the world. On the 8th day, Sirion's vessel came within sight of their destination, an island that rose from the dark waters like a great cathedral of living stone. Its shores were wreathed in mist that moved with purpose, and at its heart stood a tower so tall its peak was lost in the shadows above. The Isle of Echo, Sirion spoke, his voice heavy with memory. Here, in the world's youth, the Valar sang the great songs that shaped the foundations of Arda. But when Morgoth cast his discord into the music, the echoes of that first song fled here to hide, and here they remain still. As their vessel drew near to the island's shore, the Fellowship could hear it, a sound like singing, but so ancient and profound that it seemed to resonate in their very bones. The music spoke of creation and destruction, of light and shadow, of the eternal struggle between order and chaos that had raged since the world began. The crown of stars lies within that tower, Mithrandir said, his pendant blazing with sympathetic light. But between us and it lie guardians that have watched over the relic since the elder days. Indeed, as they stepped onto the island's crystalline shore, shapes began to emerge from the mist, tall figures wrought of starlight and shadow, bearing the forms of the first elves, but transformed by eons of service into something beyond mortal ken. These were the echoes themselves, fragments of the music given form and purpose. Their leader, a being of terrible beauty, whose every movement rang like distant bells, stepped forward to bar their path. When it spoke, its voice was the harmony of spheres made audible. Turn back, children of the lesser music. The crown of stars is not for such as you, who know only the discord of mortality. Here rests the last pure note of Eru's song, and it shall not be profaned by hands stained with the sorrows of Arda. But Mithrandir raised his pendant high, and its light blazed forth like a star reborn. I am the son of one who served the music's purpose, and I carry the light that was given to preserve what darkness would destroy. By right of heritage and need, I claim passage to the tower's heart. Tidu. The Echo Lord's form flickered like flame in the wind. Heritage? It said, its voice held wonder. What heritage can mortals claim in the deep places of the world? In answer, Mithrandir spoke a single word, a name that had not been uttered in Middle-earth since the elder days, when the Valor walked openly among the children of Iluvatar. At the sound of it, the Echo Lord reeled back, its starlight form dimming. It cannot be, it whispered. That line was broken when the gray passed into the west. Broken, perhaps, but not ended, Mithrandir replied, for love finds a way even where wisdom failed, and hope endures beyond the circles of the world. The revelation struck the fellowship like a physical blow. Arwen's eyes widened in understanding, while Legolas and Gimli exchanged glances of amazement. Even Sirion, who had sailed the straight roads in the days of wonder, stood speechless. For the word that Mithrandir had spoken was Olorin, the true name of Gandalf the Grey before he took mortal form, when he dwelt in the gardens of Lorien in Valinor and learned the music of creation at the feet of the Valar themselves. If this be true, the Echo Lord said at length, then you are more than mortal, child of two realms. Yet still I cannot grant you passage freely. The crown of stars was hidden here for a purpose, beyond even our understanding. To claim it, you must prove worthy, not by birth alone, but by the choices you make when all hope seems lost. Thus began the trial of Echo, a test more perilous than any battle with sword or spell. One by one, the members of the Fellowship were separated, each drawn into a different section of the island, where they faced visions of their deepest fears and greatest failures. Gimli found himself in the halls of Moria as they had been in their glory, watching in horror as his own greed for Mithril led to the awakening of ancient horrors. Legolas walked again through the fading forests of his youth, seeing the slow death of all growing things as the Fourth Age dawned. Eomer stood upon the Pelennor field and watched his sword brothers fall one by one, knowing that his commands had led them to their doom. But it was Arwen who faced the cruelest test of all. She stood in Rivendell, as it would be centuries hence, empty, silent, its halls echoing with the ghost of laughter that would never sound again. She saw herself as she would become if she chose mortality, aged, withered, watching helplessly as all she loved crumbled to dust. "Choose," whispered a voice like wind through autumn leaves, "the immortal life of your people, or the fleeting love of mortals. You cannot have both, daughter of twilight." Yet even as despair threatened to claim her, Arwen remembered the words Mithrandir had spoken aboard the gray ship. Love shall endure, though kingdoms fall. In that moment, she chose not safety, but sacrifice, the mortal path that would lead through sorrow to a joy beyond imagining. One by one, The fellowship passed their trials, choosing hope over despair, love over safety, sacrifice over self-preservation. And as each made their choice, the mists around the island began to clear, revealing the path to the tower's heart. But the greatest trial yet awaited, for within that tower lay not only the crown of stars, but something else, a darkness that had been waiting since the world began for someone worthy enough to be its perfect opposite. The son of Oloran stood before the tower door, his pendant blazing like a second sun, and prepared to face the truth of what he was and what he was destined to become. The Tower of First Music rose before them like a spear thrust into the heart of darkness, its walls wrought of some crystalline substance that sang in harmonics beyond mortal hearing. No door marred its perfect surface, yet as Mithrandir approached with the pendant blazing at his throat, an opening appeared, not carved or broken, but sung into existence by the resonance of his Maiar blood. Beyond this threshold lies more than ye sought, Sirion warned, his ancient eyes grave with knowledge. The crown of stars is here, aye, but it is not unguarded. In the tower's heart dwells that which was set to watch over it, the last of the great servants, bound here since the music's making. The fellowship entered the tower together, but the moment they crossed the threshold, they found themselves separated once more. Each walked now in corridors that existed only for them, following paths laid down by purposes older than the rising of the sun. Mithrandir's path led ever upward, through chambers where the very air seemed to thrum with power. Upon the walls were carved the history of the world, not as it had been, but as it should have been, had Morgoth's discord never entered the music. Here were shown the halls of Gondolin unbroken, the light of the two trees still burning in Valinor, and men and elves walking together in friendship until the world's ending. At the tower's peak, he found himself in a chamber whose ceiling opened to the starless dark above. In the center of the room, upon a pedestal of living crystal, rested the crown of stars itself. It was beautiful beyond words, a circlet of mithril so pure it seemed to be woven of captured moonlight, set with 7 stones that held the light of the first stars Varda had kindled in the void. Yet for all its beauty, power radiated from it like heat from a forge, and Mithrandir felt his mortal flesh recoil from its presence. "Magnificent, is it not?" said a voice behind him, and he turned to see a figure that made his blood run cold. It was himself, or rather, what he might become if he claimed the crown's power. This other Mithrandir stood tall and proud, robed in white that hurt to look upon, his eyes blazing with the light of stars. "I am what you could be," the figure said, circling the pedestal like a wolf stalking prey. "Take up the crown, claim your heritage as the son of the music itself, and know power beyond imagining. With this upon your brow, you could heal the broken seals without sacrifice, restore the world to what it was before the shadow fell." "And the price?" Mithrandir asked, though he dreaded the answer. His other self smiled, and it was beautiful and terrible to behold. "Only your mortality. Cast off the weakness of flesh, embrace the fire that burns within your blood, and become what your father should have been, a lord of creation itself." The temptation was overwhelming. To save Middle-earth without loss, to restore the music of the spheres, to heal every wound that shadow had made. What would he not sacrifice for such a goal? His hand reached toward the crown, drawn by its promise of power. But then he heard it, the sound of his companions' voices, raised in song. Not the music of the Ainur, but something far more precious, a mortal song filled with the beauty of things that pass away. Arwen's voice soared above the rest, singing of love that chose mortal sorrow over immortal emptiness. In that moment, Mithrandir understood the trap. The crown offered perfection, but perfection without sacrifice was sterile as starlight. It was the flaws, the struggles, the mortal choices that gave meaning to the music of creation. To claim the crown would save the world, but rob it of everything that made it worth saving. "No," he said, his hand falling to his side. Power without love is Morgoth's way. I choose the harder path." His other self snarled, its beautiful face twisting with rage. "Fool! You would let the world burn for the sake of sentiment? I would let it live," Mithrandir replied. "For what is life without the freedom to choose, even wrongly?" As he spoke those words, the crown began to glow with inner fire. But this was not the cold light of domination. It was warm as sunlight on a spring morning, gentle as his father's hand upon his brow in childhood dreams he had never lived. "Well chosen, son of my heart," said a voice he knew and loved beyond measure. Gandalf the White stepped from the shadows, his face bright with joy and pride. The crown was never meant to be worn by living heads, but to be given freely in service to what you hold most dear. "Father?" Mithrandir gasped, his eyes filling with tears he had not known he could shed. "I am here as the crown wills it," Gandalf said softly, "to witness the choice that makes you truly my son, not by blood, but by the love that chooses sacrifice over power." With infinite gentleness, the White Wizard lifted the crown of stars from its pedestal. As he did, it began to change, its solid form becoming light itself. 7 stars of such beauty that to look upon them was to remember every moment of joy that had ever been. "This is the true power of the crown," Gandalf explained. "Not to rule, but to serve. Not to command, but to inspire. Take it, my son, and use it as it was meant to be used, to kindle hope in the darkest hour." As Mithrandir received the transformed crown, its light flowed into him, but not as he had expected. Instead of overwhelming power, he felt something far more precious. The knowledge that love could indeed endure, though kingdoms fall, that hope was stronger than fear, and that even the smallest light could push back the deepest darkness. The tower began to tremble around them as ancient spells unwound themselves. Their purpose fulfilled, the guardians of the crown of stars could rest at last. But even as the structure collapsed into starlight and memory, Mithrandir found himself with his companions once more, the crown's light flowing between them like a bridge of silver fire. "Now," he said, his voice ringing with new authority, "we return to bind what should never have been loosed. But we go not as conquerors, but as healers, to restore the music that Morgoth's malice shattered long ago." The true test of his heritage was about to begin. With the crown of stars transformed into pure light that flowed like liquid starfire between them, the Fellowship made swift passage back across the sunless sea. Yet their return journey was far from peaceful, for the very foundations of the world had begun to shake as Morgoth's crown stirred in its ancient prison. The servants of darkness that had pursued them now fled before the light they bore, but greater perils awaited. The deep places of the earth, long stable since the world's shaping, had begun to shift and change. Passages that had led one way for millennia now opened onto yawning chasms, while new tunnels appeared where solid rock had stood moments before. "The crown of Morgoth rewrites the very structure of Arda," Sirion observed, his gray ship navigating waters that now flowed upward in impossible spirals. "If it fully awakens before we can bind it anew, the world itself may come apart at the seams." 3 days of increasingly desperate travel brought them at last to the deep roads, the ancient passages that led to the very roots of the mountain, where the first Dark Lord's crown lay bound by chains of starlight and will. But the roads themselves had changed beyond recognition. What had once been smooth tunnels carved by the music's power were now twisted mazes where gravity held no sway, and the laws of creation bent like heated metal. "I know another way," Radagast said suddenly, his eyes wild with vision. "The brown passes led deeper than any road of stone. Through root and earth and the dreams of sleeping stones, we can reach the crown's prison before its servants arrive." "The brown passes?" Gimli frowned. "I know those paths, the secret ways my people used in the elder days, but they have been sealed for 3 ages of the world." "Sealed? Aye, but not destroyed," the brown wizard replied. "And desperate times call for desperate measures. Follow me. if you dare brave the dreams of the mountain's bone. What followed was a journey through realms that existed more in thought than substance. The brown passes led not around obstacles, but through them, following the slow thoughts of stone and the ancient memories embedded in the earth's marrow. Time flowed strangely in these paths. Sometimes they walked for what felt like hours, only to emerge and find that mere moments had passed in the outer world. Other times, a few steps carried them across vast distances in the blink of an eye. But the strangest aspect of their journey was the sense of being watched, not by enemies, but by the earth itself, as if every pebble and grain of dust had become aware of their passage and was weighing their purpose against some cosmic balance. "We are not the first to walk this way," Arwen observed, pointing to markings on the passage walls. "Look, footprints in the stone itself, left by those who passed here in ages long forgotten." The prints were of many sizes and shapes, some clearly elven, others bearing the broad mark of dwarf boots, and a few that seemed to have been made by beings whose nature could only be guessed at. All led in the same direction, toward the heart of the world. On the second day beneath the stone, they encountered the first of the sleepers. These were not the malevolent dead they had faced before, but beings of an older sort, giants of stone and metal, who had helped shape the world in its youth, then laid themselves down to rest when their work was done. Now the disturbance of Morgoth's crown had partially wakened them, and they moved with the slow, ponderous gait of mountains learning to walk. "Who disturbs the long sleep?" rumbled one, its voice like the groaning of tectonic plates. "What need is so great that the Shapers must wake before the world's remaking?" Mithrandir stepped forward, the crown of stars blazing at his breast. "Great Shaper, I am Mithrandir, son of Aloran, and I bear the light that was made to heal what darkness has broken. The first Dark Lord's crown stirs in its bonds. If it wakes fully, all thy shaping will come to naught." The sleeper considered this with the patience of stone, its great head turning slowly to regard them. When it spoke again, its voice held the weight of mountain. "Long have we slept, but not so deep that we have not felt the tremors of malice from below. The seals weaken, and the song that bound them grows discordant. If thou goest to restore the music, great Shaper's blessing goes with thee. But know this, the price of thy success may be higher than thou dost dream." With those ominous words, the sleeper stepped aside, and the fellowship pressed on through passages that grew ever stranger. The walls here were not stone, but crystallized time itself, showing glimpses of the world as it had been and might yet be. They saw the first sunrise, the awakening of the elves, the fall of Numenor, and scenes from futures that might never come to pass. But dominating all these visions was one that recurred again and again. A figure in gray robes standing before a throne of iron, holding aloft a crown that blazed with stars. Sometimes the figure triumphed, binding the darkness forever. But just as often, they saw him fall, consumed by the very power he sought to wield. "The future is not written," Mithrandir said, as much to reassure himself as his companions. "We make our choices, and the world changes to accommodate them." Yet even as he spoke, he felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon him like the stone of the mountain itself. For deep beneath their feet, something vast and malevolent was stirring to full wakefulness, and its influence spread like poison through the roots of reality. The final stage of their journey lay ahead, the descent to the very heart of darkness, where the crown of Morgoth waited with patience older than the stars themselves. And in that dark realm, choices would be made that would echo through all the ages of the world yet to come. The deep roads ended at last in a vast chamber that seemed to exist at the confluence of all the world's darkest dreams. Here, in the uttermost foundations of Arda, stood the throne of iron, not wrought by any smith's craft, but shaped by malice itself into a seat fit for the Lord of all corruption. Upon that throne sat no living being, yet it was not empty. Shadows coiled about its arms and back, like serpents of living darkness, and from its base spread cracks in reality itself, wounds in the fabric of creation that leaked malevolence like pus from a festering wound. At the throne's feet lay Morgoth's crown, partially freed from the 7 seals that had bound it. 5 of the great wards were broken entirely, their power dissipated into the screaming void. The 6th seal flickered like a dying flame, while the 7th, though cracked and strained, still held the crown's full awakening at bay. But it would not hold much longer. "Behold," Mithrandir whispered, his voice lost in the chamber's awful vastness, "the first throne of tyranny, from which all the world's sorrows first flowed." The crown itself was a thing of terrible beauty. Black iron wrought in the shape of twisted flames, set with 3 silmarils that burned with stolen light. Even bound and partially sealed, its influence was overwhelming. The very air around it rippled with visions of conquest and domination, while the stone beneath it wept tears of liquid shadow. But they were not alone in the chamber. Arrayed before the throne in serried ranks stood an army unlike any that had marched in Middle-earth's long history. These were not orcs or trolls, but beings of pure malice given form, fragments of Morgoth's will that had broken free when the seals weakened. Their leader, a towering figure wreathed in flame and shadow, turned to face the fellowship with eyes like dying stars. "Welcome, fool," it said, and its voice was the sound of worlds ending. "I am Gothmog, first and greatest of the Balrogs, slain in Gondolin, but recalled by my master's will. Long have I waited for this hour, when the Dark Crown would wake and the world would burn in righteous fire." The battle that followed was beyond description. It was not merely a clash of sword and sorcery, but a conflict between fundamental forces: order and chaos, creation and destruction, hope and despair made manifest. The Fellowship fought with courage born of desperation, each knowing that failure here would doom not just Middle-earth, but all the circles of the world. Legolas's arrows blazed with elven light as they found their marks in creatures of pure shadow. Gimli's axe sang ancient war songs of the Khazad as it clove through armor wrought of crystallized hatred. Eomer and Faramir fought back to back, their swords weaving patterns of light in the darkness. But it was Arwen who struck the crucial blow. Drawing upon the last reserves of her elven heritage, she sang a song of such beauty and power that the very stones of the chamber began to weep, not tears of sorrow, but of joy. The music of her voice, pure and untainted by malice, created cracks in the ranks of shadow servants through which the light of the crown of stars could penetrate. Gothmog himself staggered under the assault of pure harmony, his fiery form flickering like a candle in a hurricane. "Impossible!" he roared. "No mere elf song can stand against the will of Morgoth." "Not mere song," Mithrandir replied, stepping forward with the crown of stars blazing his hand. "But the music that was sung before the world began, the theme that your master's discord could mar, but never truly silence." As he approached the throne of iron, the very air began to sing in harmonics that reality could barely contain. The crown of stars in his hands resonated with its dark counterpart, and for a moment, the chamber was filled with a sound like the ringing of cosmic bells. But then, disaster struck. Gothmog, seeing his defeat inevitable, made one last desperate gambit. Throwing himself upon the throne of iron, he shattered the 6th seal with the force of his impact. The crown of Morgoth blazed with sudden, terrible life, and a voice that had been silent since the elder days spoke once more. "My faithful servant," it said, and the words were honey poured over poison. "Too long have I slumbered in this tomb of stone. Rise now, and let the world remember why they called me the Dark Lord Melkor, mightiest of the Ainur." The chamber began to crack and crumble as power beyond measure flooded through it. The crown rose from the floor of its own accord, seeking to place itself upon some worthy head. For a terrifying moment, it seemed to consider Mithrandir himself. After all, was he not the son of the Maiar, blood of its creator's blood? But then the 7th seal blazed with renewed light, and a new voice rang out across the chamber. Not the voice of Morgoth, but of another who had once walked in the gardens of Valinor. "My son," Gandalf the White materialized beside Mithrandir, his staff blazing with the light of the flame imperishable. "Now comes the moment I prepared you for, though I prayed it would never arrive. The crown cannot be destroyed by force, only by choice, freely made." Understanding flooded through Mithrandir like a tide of starlight. The Crown of Stars was not just a weapon to bind Morgoth's power. It was a key, meant to unlock the prison of the Dark Crown's influence. But to use it thus would require a sacrifice beyond measure. "If I open that lock," he whispered, "what will be released?" Gandalf's face was grave with sorrow. Not Morgoth himself. He remains bound beyond the circles of the world. But his crown's malice, freed from its bonds, will seek a new master, and there is only one here with the blood and power to contain it. The terrible truth became clear. To save the world, Mithrandir would have to become the very thing he sought to prevent, a new Dark Lord, bearing all of Morgoth's accumulated malice within himself. Only by accepting damnation could he spare Middle-earth from destruction. The choice that would define not just his fate, but the fate of all creation, lay before him like a chasm deeper than the roots of the world. In that moment of terrible understanding, time seemed to stand still. The chamber hung balanced on the edge of catastrophe, with Morgoth's crown pulsing with malevolent life, while the seventh seal flickered like a candle in a hurricane. The choice before Mithrandir was stark: accept damnation to save the world, or watch all creation burn. But it was Arwen who spoke first, her voice cutting through the chaos like a silver blade. "There is another way," she said, stepping forward to stand beside him. "The burden need not fall on one alone. If the crown's malice requires a vessel, let it be shared among willing hearts. The darkness divided becomes weakness, while light shared becomes strength." "Impossible!" Gothmog snarled from his position upon the Iron Throne. "The crown's will cannot be split. It demands absolute dominion, or absolute destruction." Yet even as he spoke, the other members of the Fellowship moved to form a circle around Mithrandir. Gimli raised his axe in salute, while Legolas nocked an arrow to his bow, not to fight, but to choose. Éomer drew his sword and planted it point down in the stone floor, making himself an anchor. Faramir, Radagast, and even ancient Sirion took their places, each bearing the weight of their own choice. "We came this far together," Gimli said gruffly. "Seems a shame to face the end alone. The shadow cannot touch what freely gives itself to light," Legolas added, his elven wisdom shining clear. "And what is fellowship but the sharing of burdens too great for any one heart to bear?" Mithrandir looked upon his companions with eyes that held the starlight of his heritage. "You do not understand what you offer. To share in this burden is to be forever chained, neither fully mortal nor immortal, but something new and strange. The malice of Morgoth will flow through each of you, contained but never fully banished. Then we shall contain it together," Arwen said simply, "for love shared is stronger than hatred hoarded, and hope kindled in multiple hearts burns brighter than despair concentrated in one." As if responding to their unity, the Crown of Stars began to change once more. Its light divided into 9 streams, each flowing toward one of the Fellowship. But this was not the cold division of power. It was the warm sharing of strength, like a single flame lighting 8 others without diminishing itself. Gandalf watched with pride and sorrow mingled. "You have chosen the hardest path of all," he said softly, "to become guardians, not through conquest, but through sacrifice. The 9 walkers shall become the 9 keepers, binding the darkness not with chains of force, but with bonds of love." But Gothmog was not finished. With a roar of rage, he hurled himself from the Iron Throne toward Morgoth's crown, seeking to claim it for himself before the Fellowship could complete their working. For a moment it seemed he might succeed. His fiery form stretched out toward the dark relic, claws extended to grasp ultimate power. But Mithrandir was faster. Using the Crown of Stars light, he reached the Dark Crown first, not to destroy it, but to embrace it. The moment his hands closed around the twisted iron, pain beyond description flooded through him. Every evil thought, every act of malice, every moment of suffering that had ever been inflicted in Middle-earth poured into his consciousness like molten metal. Yet he was not alone. Through the bonds of fellowship, his 8 companions shared that burden, each taking a portion of the darkness into themselves. The malice that would have consumed one was diluted across 9, becoming bearable, barely. Gothmog's scream of frustrated rage shattered the very foundations of the chamber. "You fools! You have doomed yourselves! The darkness will corrupt you from within, and you will become worse than any Dark Lord, perhaps." Mithrandir gasped, his form flickering between mortal flesh and something more ethereal. "But we will be corrupted together, and in that sharing, find the strength to resist what we might become alone." The dark crown began to dissolve in his hands, its malice flowing out in tendrils of shadow that sought each member of the fellowship in turn. As the darkness entered them, each was transformed, not into servants of evil, but into something new. They remained themselves, yet they also carried within them the understanding of every shadow that had ever fallen across the world. "We are become the Nazgul of light," Sirion whispered in wonder, "bound to darkness, yet serving hope, changed forever, yet more ourselves than ever before." The chamber began to collapse around them as ancient spells unraveled, their purpose finally fulfilled. But the Fellowship, now the 9 Keepers, found themselves lifted by forces beyond their understanding, carried upward through stone and earth toward the light of day. As they emerged at last onto the surface of Middle-earth, they found a world transformed. The unnatural darkness that had been spreading from the broken seals was gone, replaced by the clean light of dawn. Birds sang in the trees, and flowers bloomed despite the season. For the malice that had poisoned the very roots of creation was now contained within willing vessels. But the price was visible in their faces. Each bore marks of their sacrifice, eyes that held depths of shadow alongside the light, expressions that spoke of sorrows beyond mortal ken, tempered by joys equally profound. They were no longer entirely of Middle-earth, yet they were bound to it by chains stronger than any forged by Ole himself. "What are we now?" Arwen asked, looking at her hands that flickered between flesh and starlight. "We are what we chose to become," Mithrandir answered, "guardians at the threshold between light and dark, forever vigilant, lest the balance tip toward chaos. The age of heroes is ended. Now begins the age of the Watchers." And in the distance, barely audible on the morning wind, came the sound of laughter. Not malicious, but genuinely amused. For Eru Iluvatar himself had heard their choice, and found in it a harmony more beautiful than any theme the music had yet contained. 7 years had passed since the binding of Morgoth's crown, and Middle-earth had entered into a peace deeper than any known since the Elder Days. Yet, for the 9 Keepers, peace was a relative thing. They walked the world as guardians and guides, their transformed nature allowing them to see threats that others could not perceive, and heal wounds that others could not touch. Mithrandir stood upon the walls of Minas Tirith, watching the sun set over a realm made whole. The city had never been more beautiful. Its white stones glowed with inner light, and gardens bloomed in places where once only bare stone had endured. The healing power that flowed from the Keepers had transformed not just the city, but all the lands they touched. Yet the cost was ever present. In his chest, like a second heart, pulsed the fragment of Morgoth's malice he had chosen to bear. It whispered constantly of easier paths, of the power he could wield if he simply stopped resisting its influence. The whispers were never loud enough to overcome his will, but they were always there, a constant reminder of what he had chosen to become. "You look troubled, my friend," said a familiar voice. Aragorn approached, his hair now silver with age, though his step remained firm. The King of Gondor, and Arnor, was one of the few who could still look upon the Keepers without discomfort. Most mortals found their transformed nature unsettling, even when they could not name why. "Not troubled," Mithrandir replied, thoughtful. "The darkness grows restless of late. Something stirs in the deep places of the world, and I fear our vigil may soon be tested." Indeed, strange reports had been coming in from across Middle-earth. In the Grey Mountains, Miners spoke of new tunnels that had appeared overnight, delved by no earthly craft. The rangers of the north told of lights dancing in the sky that followed no pattern of star or season. Even the Shire, most peaceful of all realms, had experienced odd disturbances, crops growing too fast, animals behaving strangely, and children waking from dreams they could not remember but dared not forget. "Perhaps it is time to gather the Nine once more," Aragorn suggested. "If a new threat rises, surely you are stronger together than apart." But even as he spoke those words, a commotion arose in the courtyard below. A messenger had arrived at full gallop, his horse lathered with sweat and his eyes wild with terror. The news he bore sent a chill through Mithrandir's transformed heart. "Lord Keeper," the messenger gasped, falling to his knees. "Dire tidings from the north. The lonely mountain burns with unnatural fire, and from its depths come voices singing in the old tongue of Mordor. King Dain calls for aid, for his people flee before shadows that no weapon can touch." This was worse than Mithrandir had feared. The lonely mountain held one of the seven hoards, ancient treasures that predated even the forging of the Rings of Power. If something had corrupted that hoard, the implications were terrible beyond measure. Within hours, a signal had gone out across Middle-earth, not carried by rider or bird, but flowing through the bonds that connected the Nine Keepers to one another. One by one, they began to converge upon the lonely mountain, drawn by the same terrible certainty that their greatest test was at hand. Arwen arrived first, her immortal heritage allowing her to travel by paths that existed more in thought than substance. She found Mithrandir waiting upon the slopes below the mountain, his face grave with worry. "I can feel it," she said without preamble. "Something ancient has awakened, older than Morgoth himself, from the days before the music began. The unnamed dark," Mithrandir whispered, and his voice held the weight of terrible knowledge. "I had hoped it was only legend, but the signs are unmistakable. When we bound Morgoth's malice within ourselves, we created a vacuum, a space where something else could enter the world." One by one, the other keepers arrived. Legolas came down from the north like a silver arrow, while Gimli emerged from the deep roads with dire news of disturbances in all the dwarf hold. Eomer rode hard from Rohan, his horse near collapse from the desperate journey. Faramir and Radagast appeared as if from the very air, their forms flickering between flesh and spirit. Even ancient Círdan had come, abandoning his ships for the first time in an age. The last to arrive was the most disturbing. Gothmog, the fallen Balrog, who had somehow survived the binding and been transformed by it into something neither light nor dark, but desperately seeking balance. "I felt the call," he said, his voice like distant thunder. "Whatever rises now, it threatens the stability we have maintained. The darkness I once served seems as nothing compared to what stirs in the mountain's heart." Together, the Nine approached the lonely mountain's gate, finding it sealed not by dwarf craft, but by power that predated the world's making. The stone itself had been transformed into something like black glass, smooth as a mirror, and cold beyond the touch of winter. But as they drew near, the barrier began to dissolve, revealing not the familiar halls of Erebor, but a passage that led down into depths that should not have existed. The walls were not carved stone, but crystallized void, darkness given substance, and shaped by will older than creation itself. The unnamed dark seeks form, Mithrandir realized with growing horror. It has been waiting beyond the circles of the world since before the music began, and now it sees a path to enter Arda. The treasures of the mountain, combined with the resonance of our transformed nature, have created a bridge it can cross. "Then we seal the bridge," Gimli declared, hefting his axe. "Bring down the mountain if we must." But Mithrandir shook his head. "It is too late for that. The bridge exists now in more than stone. It reaches through the very fabric of reality. If we do not face what comes, it will find another path, and another, until all barriers fail." As if summoned by his word, something began to emerge from the depths of the crystallized passage. It was not a creature in any sense they understood, but rather an absence given shape, a walking void that existed not in opposition to light, but as the space between all light, the silence between all song. When it spoke, its voice was not heard, but felt, resonating in the hollow spaces of their soul. I am what was before the beginning, it said. I am what shall be after the ending. The music was sung to fill the emptiness I am, but music ends and emptiness endures. Join with me, children of two natures, and know the peace of the void eternal. The final confrontation was at hand, not between good and evil, but between existence and the absence of existence itself. And for the first time since taking up their burden, the Nine Keepers wondered if love and sacrifice would be enough to stand against the ultimate darkness. The thing that stood before them defied every sense and understanding. It was not darkness as they knew it, not the absence of light, but the absence of existence itself. Where it walked, reality wavered and grew thin, as if the very foundations of Arda recoiled from its presence. You cannot fight what is not. It spoke without voice, communicated without words. I am the space between thoughts, the pause between heartbeats, the silence that defines all sound. To strike at me is to strike at the void that gives meaning to all things. The Nine Keepers formed their circle as they had 7 years before, but this time they faced an enemy that could not be bound or contained. How does one imprison nothingness? How does one defeat that which exists in the spaces between existence? There must be a way, Arwen said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped them all. Everything that is has purpose. Even this, perhaps. Perhaps it does not seek to destroy, but to understand. The unnamed dark shifted, its not form rippling like heat above summer stone. Understanding requires existence. I am the question that precedes all answers, the doubt that makes faith meaningful. I do not seek to destroy, I seek to complete the pattern that was left unfinished when the music began. Suddenly, Mithrandir understood. The revelation struck him like a bolt of lightning, illuminating truths that had hidden in shadow since the world's making. You are not evil, he breathed. You are necessary. The music of the Ainur was never meant to be complete in itself. It required the counterpoint of silence to give it meaning. Without you, there would be no spaces between the notes, no rests that make the melody beautiful. But if we let you into the world fully, Legolas said, his keen mind grasping the implications, existence itself will begin to unravel. The pattern will be complete, but at the cost of everything we know and love. The unnamed dark pulsed with something that might have been approval. The young elf sees truly. To complete the pattern is to end it, yet to leave it incomplete is to deny the fullness of creation's purpose. It was Gimli who found the answer, his practical dwarf mind cutting through the philosophical maze. Then, don't complete it all at once, he said bluntly. Music isn't meant to be played in a single moment. It unfolds over time. Let the pattern complete itself slowly, over ages yet to come. The very long path, whispered Radagast, his eyes bright with sudden understanding. Not the ending of music, but its transformation into something greater. A song that includes silence as well as sound, emptiness as well as fullness. One by one, the Nine Keepers began to understand what was being asked of them. They had bound Morgoth's malice within themselves, transforming from heroes into guardians. Now they were being called to an even greater sacrifice, to become bridges between existence and void, allowing the unnamed dark to enter the world gradually, safely, over the course of ages. We would be changed beyond recognition, Faramir said quietly. No longer guardians of light against dark, but shepherds of the balance itself. We would guide the world's slow transformation from music into something beyond music. The age of watching would end, Círdan added, his ancient wisdom grasping the full scope of what was proposed, and the age of becoming would begin. Even Gothmog, the fallen Balrog, saw the necessity of it. I have served shadow and been transformed by light. Perhaps it is time to learn what lies beyond both. But it was Mithrandir who spoke the final word, his voice carrying the authority of one who had looked into the very heart of creation and found it good. We choose the longest path, he said. Not the quick ending or the static preservation, but the slow dance of change that allows all things to become what they were meant to be. We will be the bridges between is and is not, the guardians of becoming itself. The unnamed dark pulsed with what might have been gratitude, if such a concept could apply to something that existed in the spaces between concepts. Then let the new music begin, not the song of the Ainur alone, nor the silence that preceded it, but the greater symphony that encompasses both. As the Nine Keepers joined hands around the entity that was not, their forms began to change once more. They became translucent, existing simultaneously in the world of substance and the realm of void. Through them, the unnamed dark began to flow into reality, not as a flood that would drown all existence, but as a gentle rain that would nourish new forms of being over countless ages. The transformation of Middle-earth began slowly, almost imperceptibly. Colors became richer by gaining access to new spaces between hues. Music grew more beautiful by learning to embrace the silences that gave notes meaning. Love deepened by acknowledging the spaces between hearts that made connection precious. The Nine Keepers, now become the Nine Bridges, took their places throughout the world. They would walk between the spaces, guiding the slow transformation, ensuring that change came at a pace that allowed wisdom to grow alongside wonder. Mithrandir found himself standing once more upon the walls of Minas Tirith, but the city he saw was subtly different, not changed in substance, but enriched by possibility. The people below continued their lives, unaware that the very nature of existence was slowly, carefully being expanded to include new forms of beauty they had never imagined. "What have we become?" Arwen asked, her voice seeming to come from both near and far away. "We have become what we were always meant to be," Mithrandir replied, watching the sun set over a world that was learning to dance between light and shadow, sound and silence, being and becoming. "We are the children of the music's next movement, the guardians of the song that has no ending because it learns always to begin anew." In the distance, carried on winds that blew from everywhere and nowhere, came the sound of laughter. Not the malicious laughter of the dark, nor the bright laughter of the light, but something deeper and more complex. It was the laughter of creation itself, delighting in the discovery that even endings could become beginnings, and that love was indeed stronger than any force in existence, even the force of existence itself. The son of the White Wizard had found his destiny at last, not as a conqueror of darkness or a champion of light, but as a bridge between all possibility, ensuring that the music of creation would never truly end, but would always find new ways to begin again. And in that beginning, all things were made new. Thus ends the tale of the son of the White Wizard, who chose not to rule the world, but to help it become more than it had ever dreamed possible. May his choice echo through all the ages yet to come, in every moment when love chooses sacrifice over power, and hope chooses growth over certainty.